Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to our last Commander 2016 deck list evaluation. This time we're going to look at Invent Superiority. So now if you're wondering, what about the other 4 decks? We've already done videos on those over the last 4 days. Check out our channel. There is a playlist. You can watch them all if you would like. But today we're going to focus on this deck, which is an artifact deck. Quickly before we get started though, just a reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll see some links to our Amazon affiliate store, as well as our Patreon page. So if you're so inclined, please check out those links, and anyone who makes any purchases through any of the Amazon links, a small percentage will come back to help the channel, which is always very, very appreciated, as well as the folks that support us on Patreon. Thank you to all of you who have already done that. And having said that, let's get into the deck list itself. And quickly, the deck in general, just to give you a basic idea, considering I did say artifact deck, but that can mean a lot of things. This particular artifact deck is focused on artifact creatures. It's a very aggressive deck. It's really trying to let you beat down with a lot of creatures. As a matter of fact, you're going to find most of the deck includes creatures and artifacts. There's a few sorcery sprinkled in here, but for the most part, you're just getting in the red zone with these artifact creatures. Now, what's nice about this deck is there's another kind of sub-theme of juggling cards back from your graveyard to your battlefield. So there's a lot of ways to get a artifact out of your graveyard and either to your hand or back in the battlefield. And it almost feels like you could just juggle cards as you need them, like almost like your graveyard is another resource. And that's actually pretty cool. It allows you to, in certain board states, to say, you know what, I don't really need this artifact anymore. Let me go ahead and sacrifice it, take this one back. Later on, maybe I need the other one back again. I'm able to bring that one back. Also, there's some artifacts that will give you a benefit when they get sent to the graveyard. So that's also nice too. They're very nice kind of sacrifice fodder that gives you a bonus. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Another deck that looks, I don't know, maybe simple on the surface, but as you get into it, it feels more and more complex, and that seems to be the theme with all 5 of these decks, and that's pretty cool. Having said that, let's get into the new cards for today. And we have, again, 15 brand new cards to look at. Now at this point, since this is the last of the 5 decks, a lot of these are repeats, so we've talked about them in previous videos. I don't want to spend too much time talking about a card we've already talked about, so I'll probably go a little bit quick through some of these, or at least talk about how they're relevant in this particular deck. But if you want my full thoughts on a particular card, definitely check out the first time the card was introduced in one of the other videos. I probably talk a little more about it. But having said that, let's start off with our commanders, which of course are always unique. And we'll begin with our 4-color commander, Brea Ethereum Shaper. Now notice she's 4 colors, missing green, because green is kind of the anti-artifact color, so that kind of makes sense for the theme of the deck. She herself is an artifact, so that's very important to note. Also a 4/4 creature, but also gives you 2 1/1 blue Thopter tokens with flying when she enters the battlefield. So you're actually getting 6 power toughness on the battlefield when she comes in. And if you play her a couple times over the course of the game, there's definitely some value there with the Thopter tokens. And at any time, you can pay 2, sacrifice 2 artifacts, and you get one of these 3 abilities. You can either do 3 damage to a player, -4/-4 to a creature, or you gain 5 life. Now, on the surface, to me, she feels like maybe she was inspired a little bit by Umezawa's Jitte. Granted, she's not nearly as powerful or broken as that card, which is a good thing. But I just feel like with the abilities especially, just feels like maybe there's a little inspiration there, and that's pretty cool. She's very powerful, though. I mean, whenever you have the ability to choose between a number of different outcomes like this, you're going to find value there just through versatility. I mean, that's huge. Versatility can be very, very powerful on any Magic card. Definitely here where you can use it as damage removal or life gain. That's a pretty big deal, actually. Now, when it comes to sacrificing artifacts, this deck's interesting because, again, you have a lot of stuff to sacrifice. However, it's not like you're going to be plugging out a bunch of like artifact tokens or anything like that. You're really going to be sacrificing things and having to make a decision. When is this the right time to sacrifice this thing, and when or if I'm in a state where I'm able to bring it back quickly. Those are the type of decisions you'll have to make when it comes to all these sacrifice effects. So I think it's important to kind of put that on the table. But having said that, she's awesome. Another great 4-color commander that they came out with for this product. And just like the other decks, you can either choose to play her as your commander, or you could go with 2 of the partners out of the box. And if you do, you start off with your allied color partner, and this time it's Silas Wren Seeker Adept. Much like all the other decks, you have 1 allied color partner and you have 2 enemy color partners. So if you go out of the box with the partner concept, you will have to use this card. This is also an artifact creature, 2/2 Death Touch, And whenever this deals combat damage to a player, you get to choose a target artifact from your graveyard, and you may cast that card this turn. So it is a way to get it out of the graveyard, which is very nice because this is, like I said, exactly what this deck's trying to do. The only thing that's a tad awkward about this card, I think, is this only costs 3, and because it only costs 3, he's fragile. They only gave you a 2/2 here. But yes, you can cast this early and often, which is nice. But when you cast it early, there might not be any targets for it. Like, sure, maybe it can still get across for a little bit of damage early before your opponent starts getting creatures out, or one of your opponents gets creatures out, so that's fine. But you don't really get the true benefit of this card until later, and at that point, it might be hard for this card to get its damage across. So that feels a tad awkward to me. But still, when you can pull it off, it's a good payoff. And again, you're not putting a lot of mana into it, so I guess that's kind of the advantage of the card. Next we have a Kyrie Line Slinger. This is our first enemy colored commander, and this one only costs 2, but I feel like actually in a lot of ways is better than the previous one we saw. So there's just tons of upside here for 2. Obviously comes in as a 0/3, but has first strike and vigilance and gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. And once you see this deck list, you'll know that that's going to get pretty aggressive pretty quickly. Now granted, she only costs 2 and she is fragile. I mean, a lightning bolt type spell can just take her out just like that. However, if she's your commander, playing her again isn't super expensive considering she only costs 2. Next time will be 4. That's not too bad. And especially later in the game, she can be a beater. I mean, first strike and vigilance, you can freely attack with her. You don't really have to worry about most creatures being able to block her just because of the first strike and the size that she'll have in her power. And vigilance means she can also protect you. I mean, that's fantastic. So tons of value here for 2. And our last enemy colored partner is Bruce Tarl Boorish Herder. This one's interesting because this one doesn't really do anything with artifacts at all, but it does stuff with attacking creatures, which is, of course, another big part of this deck, considering this is just kind of a beatdown version of artifacts. So when he comes into play or attacks, he gives something double strike and lifelink. That seems really good. And even if he just attacks on his own, he's attacking as a 3/3 double strike lifelinker. Again, real decent value, I think, for 4 mana. And this is another ally. So if you just want to take this card and move it over to an ally deck, this would actually be a fantastic card in an ally deck, I think. Now let's move on to the other new cards. And we start off with Fairy Artisans. I don't think we've talked about this one yet. So this completely makes sense in this deck. I mean, it's a 2/2 flyer for 4, which, okay, it's a little fragile. But what's neat about this is whenever an opponent plays a creature, you get a token that's an artifact version of that creature. However, the weird part is whenever the opponent or the next opponent plays a creature, you get one of that creature, but you have to get rid of all the other tokens made with this card. So you basically get an artifact version of the last creature played by any opponent, which is interesting because someone could play something really cool and you could get a great token, but the next person could go ahead and play some 1/1 creature and you just kind of lose it. So I find that kind of interesting. Now it is non-token creature, so you don't have to worry about like someone creating a token and getting rid of something good of yours, but still someone could play something small and you kind of lose your advantage unless you have a way to somehow get rid of this card before that happens. But also too, opponents are going to have control over what they play, so I would be very surprised if somebody sets you up with something that's going to help you like win the game, right? Like they're going to be really careful about what they play when this is in the battlefield. So just a few things to think about, but there can be at least some value found from this card. It is super high variance, and again, this card gets better if you're maybe making a political alliance with somebody who's going to let you have something good, at least temporarily. But again, that's only probably really good if that person is the person that plays the turn before you, because if there's any turns in between, someone could kind of undo what they did to help you. So it's a really unique card. I think it's a fun card, but yeah, if you're not into high variance, this one might not be for you. Mages of the Will. Okay, first off, very surprised this wasn't in yesterday's deck. Like, I almost feel like this was completely designed for yesterday's deck, and like I had to like do a double take and think like, did I like put this in the wrong deck list or something? I kind of wonder if maybe originally it was in that deck and maybe it was too powerful in that deck and they moved it to this one. I don't know. It just seems really out of place here, and it seems like it really would have fit in yesterday. But let's talk about the card. It's Mages of the Will. It costs a black and 2. It's a 3/3 creature, but here's where things get crazy. If you pay a black and 2 and tap it and exile exile it, you get to basically play Yawgmoth's Will, which is one of the most powerful sorceries of all time. As a matter of fact, it is restricted in Vintage, it's banned in Legacy, it's not good. But the main reason it's as good as it is because it plays really well with Storm. So if you're able to have a bunch of ritual effects in your graveyard, Yawgmoth's Will can just kind of go off and you can hit your Storm count and kind of win the game that way pretty easily. This is also a card you see a lot of times in cubes that have a Storm theme, stuff like that. So the Mage's Cycle, if you're not familiar with it, basically in the Time Spiral block, every set of that block had a cycle of creatures that had the abilities that were based on some of the most powerful spells in the history of Magic. Back in Commander 2015, they went ahead and gave us another one of these Maguses, and it was Magus of the Wheel, which was Wheel of Fortune, which again also would have made sense in yesterday's deck. But this year, we get Magus of the Wheel based on Yawgmoth's Will. Here's the question whenever you see a card like this, though. When they try to take a very, very powerful thing and water it down, one of three things happen. Either they hit the sweet spot and they make a very fair card. That's an option. Or sometimes they just water it down too much and it becomes almost unplayable. Or thirdly, they don't do it enough and it's still broken. So where does this one land? I'm not sure. I'd have to play with it, I think, and kind of see how it falls. But quite honestly, the big drawback to this card is if you want to use the Yawgmoth's Will effect, you have to basically get the summoning sickness off this thing. If you can give it haste, wonderful, but for the most part, you're going to be waiting for your turn to come back around before you can use it, and it gives people a lot of time to deal with the problem. It's a 3/3, a lightning bolt can take it out, you know. So the fragility of this creature is kind of the drawback. Now, if you get there, then you pay a black and 2. You're just paying just like you would for Yawgmoth's Will, exiling this, and you get a pretty powerful effect. Now, if you do get to untap with this thing, how does it really work in this deck? Well, it really does one of the things this deck wants to try to do, and it allows you to play things out of your graveyard. So that completely makes sense with this deck, by all means. But you're not going to see a lot of like sorceries, and there's no like Storm combo here or anything like that. Pretty much what you're doing is you're bringing back a bunch of artifacts, right? At least based on how much mana you can afford at that time. Later in the game, you can get more value out of this than earlier in the game, considering you have to pay 3 to cast it. Whatever mana you have left over, you can start playing with stuff out of your graveyard, which is pretty cool. You do have a few sorceries in this deck, so there are some sorceries you could recast, but for the most part, you're probably just replaying creatures more than anything, and that's okay, because that's what this deck's trying to do. It's just trying to overwhelm with creatures, and it can do that very well, I think. Outside of this deck, will this card see any play? I don't know. I think the fragility of it may hold it back a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised, though, to see this as maybe a one-of in, like, Legacy Storm. I'd like to see someone kind of try it out. It's one of those cards that you're not going to, like, stock your deck with it. There's just better things you could be doing. But sometimes as a one-of, as a surprise card, I don't know. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But I could see someone trying it out, if nothing else. Alright, our next new card is Armory Automation, another brand new one, and this is actually pretty cool. It's a 2/2 for 3, but when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can attach any number of target equipment to it, and that includes other people's equipment. Okay, so that's actually cool. Now, you typically don't want to play a card like this unless you have a fair amount of equipment in your deck, and there's some good equipment in this deck, because you want to make sure you're going to have targets for this at least a good percentage of the time. You don't want to rely necessarily on what your opponent's doing, right? But either way, you're still going to hopefully have some targets to attach to this. One thing to remember, though, if you attach an opponent's card to this, they still own the equipment, so there's certain benefits that they still control or own. For example, like if it's like an Umezawa's Jitte, they're still going to be able to pay to control what happens to the counters on that card. You don't get that because you don't actually control the equipment. You just have the benefit from the equipment. So just something to keep in mind there. But for the most part, this could actually do a lot of work. And it only costs 3. Granted, it's a small creature. But if you have some equipment to just attach immediately to this, there's huge value here. Next we have Coastal Breach, which is the Undaunted card for this set. This time we get the blue one that completes the cycle. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand, and Undaunted makes these cards extremely powerful in multiplayer, and I love that. Awesome design, fantastic inclusion. Parting thoughts. We saw this one yesterday. At worst, it's a pay a black and 2, destroy target creature. At best, you can pay a little bit of life and also draw some cards off it too. Typically, I like to run cards like this if I know I have some creatures that may have some counters, which in a pinch, I might be able to destroy one of my own creatures for card draw if I feel that's important. But Even so, like I said, worst this is going to do for you is destroy a creature for 3. That's still real good. Next we have Migratory Route. We've actually seen this one, I think, 3 times now. But this is a fantastic card. I won't spend a lot of time on it since we've already talked about it. But basic land cycling, and this thing costs 5. So getting 4 flyers for 5, a lot of value there. And the option to cycle it, this is awesome. Grave Upheaval, another one of the basic land cycling cards. Again, I'm happy to pay 6 to take something out of a graveyard, as a creature out of any graveyard, put into play under my control. It has haste. So yes, it does work well with the fact that this particular deck wants to dip into the graveyard quite often, but you have the extra ability to go into someone else's graveyard if they happen to have something better. It's awesome. Grip of Hyreses, we've seen this one in another deck as well, but this is nice because it's an instant, lets you basically steal a piece of equipment and even use it as a blocker since it gives you the 0/0 Black Germ token as well. I did mention when we first saw this card, potentially, maybe I could see this as a sideboard card in some Legacy decks. It takes care of things like Batterskull. It is blue, it can be pitched to Force of Will, so maybe another one to keep an eye on there. Ancient Excavation, again, I think this is the 3rd time we saw this one. Another card that has basic land cycling. It's kind of like having just like an opportunity to do one big loot, which is awesome. I felt like this card probably made a little more sense in yesterday's deck, but at the same time, this deck is also dabbling in the graveyard quite a bit, so it fits here too. Curse of Vengeance. I think this is the first time we've seen this one in a deck, but this one's interesting to me. Like, this is a high variance card, and let me just start off by saying that. And there's, I guess, maybe a sweet spot where this is good. Like, you don't want to play this too early because you're going to put it on a player, and you're basically, like, making a wager like a Deadpool. You're just kind of saying, like, okay, this is the person I think is going to go out first or next, right? Like, that's kind of crazy. And what's funny is if you do that too soon, you don't really have a lot of information to go by, right? Like, you can choose a player because maybe you feel like they're the weakest player at the table, but then that's kind of insulting, and then they'll probably just start attacking you, and maybe it will backfire, especially if they happen to develop a great board state. Or you do it later where you think, okay, this person's down to like 1 life, they're about to go out, I can ping them and kill them, but at the same time, like, then you don't get any benefit, right? So there's a sweet spot in the middle where you have to kind of roll the dice and gamble and say, okay, this is probably the person who will go out next just based on everything I'm seeing here, and if that happens, maybe they have a turn or two, they might play some spells, I get a little bit of advantage out of this. I mean, the thing only costs 1 mana, so it's not a huge commitment or anything. I think this card is just more of a fun card than anything. I mean, you're, like I said, it's a Deadpool. You're basically taking a bet on who's going to go out next, and that's kind of silly and funny, especially if you put it on your friend. Like, I could see people just playing this turn 1 on their friend and being like, I'm coming after you, you know, right? Like, that's just kind of the fun silliness of a card like this. Other than that, I don't know. If you're not into high variance cards, again, this might be one you want to switch out. Ash Barrens, of course, this is the last of the new cards, and this one's in all 5 decks. We've talked about it, but basically just nice land cycling ability to fix your colors. All right, let's move on to the reprints, and you'll start to get a better idea now of what this deck's trying to do with some of these big creatures and some of the juggling effect back and forth from the graveyard. First we have Sanctum Gargoyle, and it begins already. You get yourself a 2/3 flyer for 4. It itself is an artifact that's important, and when you have this enter the battlefield, it can return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. This card pretty much embodies everything this deck's trying to do. Chief Engineer. Giving artifact spells you cast Convoke is kind of nice. This isn't a deck that's like going super into like tokens or anything like that, which sometimes really empowers Convoke, nor is it really trying to cast too many really large things. I mean, there's some large creatures, but for the most part, this is just kind of a nice bonus to have. But if it wasn't in the deck, like it wouldn't cripple the deck or anything if you like don't draw this, for example. Ethereum Sculptor, another nice inclusion. It, again, itself is an artifact, and also, yes, it's a 1/2 creature. It's very fragile, but artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. That's great as just a plain staple in any type of artifact deck in Commander. Ethersworn Educator. This one is another one that's a nice size flying artifact creature, and again, you're going to see a lot of that theme too. There's a lot of these things that are flying to get their damage across. And what's nice is if you have the extra mana, it can actually do some cool things. Destroy target creature or enchantment is very strong, attached to a creature as a repeatable ability, even though it does tap it. And also you can pay to untap it. So if you got the mana, you can start really dealing out some damage with this card. And more importantly, what this is there for is it will get rid of the flyers that are in your way. So you might only have to take out a couple flyers on somebody's board to be able to start getting in with some of your big flying creatures, and it really works well in a situation like that. Master of Ethereum potentially could be a very, very large card in itself, considering the number of artifacts and artifact creatures you're playing. It doesn't have evasion, but also it's an anthem effect for other artifact creatures. This is a pretty huge deal in this deck, can do a lot of work for sure. Trinket Mage, always a nice little tutor spell for artifacts, and there's a lot of one casting cost stuff you can get with this. Mostly mana fixing, things like Soul Ring or Mana Acceleration, but still, definitely worth it. Fidler Engineer, another way to kind of ramp your mana out a little bit, and this is fine. You can tap to add 2 mana of any one color. Of course, it can only be spent to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts, but that's just fine because most of the time you're covered in this deck. Godo Bandit Warlord, this is actually a pretty good card. This always surprises me how good this card is. Its interaction with equipment and the fact that it itself can attack twice is very, very interesting sometimes. Like if you have a good piece of equipment to search up with this, attach to it, attack with your creatures, and then you get a second attack with Godo, you can actually sometimes do quite a bit of damage, or if there's a nice ability attached to that equipment, like lifelink or something, and gain some life. Like, there's just a lot of good interactions you can do with this card. It's very surprising how strong it can be. Also, if you happen to need a card for your samurai deck, I got the card for you. So it's a little side benefit, I guess. You won't really have that benefit in this particular deck, but hey, it's there if you ever need it. Hellkite Igniter. This is another flyer, flying haste 5/5, so it's got a lot of power just right there on its own flatly. But the fact that you can pay 2 to give a +X/+O based on how many artifacts you control is very, very strong. Again, it's got 5 toughness. You do have to take that into account if you're going into a battle with some other decent sized flyers. They could trade with this. At the very least, this is taking out something of significant size, or hopefully getting across for a lot of damage. Hellkite Tyrant. This is kind of funny because there is a secondary win condition kind of built here. If you have 20 or more artifacts at your upkeep with this card in play, you actually win the game. Also, it's a 6/5 flying trampler that when it deals combat damage to a player, you get to steal all their artifacts. So if someone else at the table is playing an artifact deck, like that 20 artifact thing could be achievable with a card like this, depending on how things go. You do have to untap with those 20 artifacts, so you know, you're going to have everybody at the table trying to stop that at that point because it's just going to end the game. So that's probably not super realistic when you have 4, 5, 6 players at the table. But at the same time, if you play this maybe later in the game, you're down to 1 or 2 opponents, there might not be as many answers available at that point to deal with this in time. So I find that actually kind of intriguing, if nothing else. But you know what? Even if you never hit that 20 artifact threshold, you still got yourself a 6/5 flying trample creature, and you could potentially steal some decent artifacts out there, so that's pretty cool. Slowband Goblin Tinker. Here's another card that's going to help you protect your most valuable artifact at any given time. So maybe it's that big creature that needs to get across for the damage. Maybe it's an artifact that's enabling something to protect yourself. But at the very least, you can sacrifice something else to make that indestructible to end a turn. What's nice about having a card like this on the battlefield is it's going to just simply make players think twice about targeting you with destroy effects on your stuff because they know you could potentially pull out an answer for it. So unless they're really kind of all in on trying to take you out, they might just simply hold on to that destruction until they can get rid of this card, or they may just use it on somebody else. Filigree Angel. This one's a little more expensive, but the payout's kind of nice. I mean, it's a 4/4 flyer. It's an artifact again itself. When it comes into play, you're at least gaining 3 life, but let's face it, if your deck's working the way you want it to, you're gaining a ton of life off this thing. So the life swing here just could be astronomical, and that's where this card becomes really good in this deck. So yeah, maybe not a win condition or anything, but definitely a way to build a big life buffer for sure. Hannah Ship's Navigator. Awesome reprint here. I'll tell you this. This is a card that wasn't like super expensive or anything, but there was a Judge's promo version with this art, and this is Therese Nielsen art. Looks incredible, and other than the Judge's promo, there's no way to get this art until now. So really awesome inclusion here. And talk about a card that's doing exactly what this deck wants to do. She's a little fragile, granted is a 1/2, but you can pay a blue, a white, and 1 and tap her, return target artifact or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. Perfect for this deck, which is encouraging you to sacrifice artifacts. Here's a way to bring them back. Speaking of cards you may want to return from your graveyard quite often, Baleful Strix is definitely one of them. It only costs 2, it's a 1/1 flying death touch, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. You're probably pretty familiar with this card because it sees a lot of play in a lot of different places. And let's face it, like, I pay 2, I draw a card, I trade with some big flyer. This is again going to help me get my big flyers across later. It goes to the graveyard, I bring it back with Hannah or something like that. Rinse, wash, and repeat. This is very good in this deck. Sphinx Summoner, here's another flyer. It's another artifact as well, much like the previous card. This time around you may basically tutor for any artifact card, reveal and put in your hand. That's pretty awesome. So even though the flyer is a little bit smaller than some of the others, I mean, that tutor effect is huge. Jor Kadeen, the Prevailer, another card that potentially could be in win condition. I mean, this is going to pump all your stuff as long as you have Metalcraft, which if you're doing it right, you probably do, right? So this card on its own could be an 8/4 first striker. I mean, that's pretty awesome just by itself, not to mention all the other creatures you control getting +3/+0 as long as you have Metalcraft. This is phenomenal. Sharum the Hedgeman. Talk about a very reasonably priced card. Granted, it is Esper colors, but still, you get yourself a 5/5 flyer for 6 that also lets you take a artifact from your graveyard, put it right back in the battlefield. Tons of value here. Perfect for what this deck's trying to do. Sidri Galvanic Genius. This is another really cool reprint. Not an expensive card necessarily. You could probably pick up the original for like a couple dollars, but at the same time, yes, she's a little fragile, but what she does is just pretty awesome. I mean, she can animate artifacts and make them creatures, and maybe more importantly, she can give an artifact creature Death Touch and Lifelink for just 2 mana. That can really add up, especially the Lifelink. That can be a huge life swing for you with some of these big Haymaker creatures you do have in this deck. Etched Oracle, this card really wants you to use Sunburst. I mean, it wants you to play this as a 4/4. And a 4/4 for 4, one of each color, isn't super economical, but the fact that you can then pay 1, remove those 4 counters to draw 3 cards, that's really what this is trying to do. And hey, if you're able to return this card from your graveyard to your hand at some point and do it again later in the game, value can really start to add up here. Myr Battlespear. This card is a beater. I don't know if you've ever played with this before, but this thing just can take someone out quick. It's in a lot of cubes. You see this in a lot of power cubes, even vintage cubes. It's really that good. But basically, it does a couple great things in this deck. First off, when it comes into play, you get 4 Myr tokens that are 1/1s, which are nice if you have to use them as sacrifice fodder or something at some point. But as long as this thing's on the battlefield, you probably don't want to do that because they really enable this to be a really strong creature when it attacks in on a particular opponent. Also, you have some other Myrs in this deck, so they can also supplement this particular card, which is kind of nice, and they also support it in certain ways, as we'll see in just a moment, but this is a really cool inclusion. Myr Retriever. Here's one of those examples. It's a Myr, so it works really well with the previous card. Also, when it dies, you can return a target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Perfect for the Myr Battlespear because you kind of want to recast it so you get the Myr tokens again. So this plays really well with that card. And we get ourselves another Myr. This time we get a Shimmer Myr, and this has flash, but more importantly, you may cast artifact spells as though they have flash, and that could be a pretty big deal too, especially with cards like the previous 2. Solemn Simulacrum, just a classic artifact creature, and no surprise that this is here. It seems innocuous unless you're more experienced with the card, then you know how much incremental value you get here. Paying 4 for a 2/2 gives you 2 life, and when it dies you get to draw a card. It really is a card that's much more powerful than it appears on paper, and if you've played with it before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's phenomenal. Soul of New Phyrexia. This was one of the souls that they did. I think it was Magic 2015, if I'm not mistaken. We had a soul in each color, and we had an artifact version. This, of course, was the artifact. And yes, okay, it's no Wormcoil Engine, but it's still pretty good. Getting a 6/6 Trampler in this deck feels real good to me, but maybe more importantly, the fact that I can pay 5 and give all permanents I control indestructible to end a turn. That will be very relevant at times. A nice way to protect your stuff against, say, a Wrath effect or something like that. And also, if this does end up in your graveyard, then you can go ahead and exile and pay 5 and still get this effect at least one more time. That's phenomenal. Hey, guess what? You got a Planeswalker. Who would have thought that, actually? Because the other 4 decks do not get Planeswalkers. So, yeah, this is the one deck that gets one. It's Duretti Scrap Savant. Really interesting inclusion here. Back in Commander 2014, they did a series of monocolor decks, and for each one, the commander was actually a Planeswalker, and it had the note at the bottom that it can be your commander. And of course, this was the one from the red deck, which also was an artifact-focused deck. So completely makes sense here. I just find it a little unique that they didn't give the other decks a Planeswalker like this, or maybe just go ahead and reprinted some of the others from Commander 2014, because I thought they all were really cool. This one may be the best, perhaps most popular out of the 5, considering that it does see a lot of cube play as well as commander play. But having said that, really good in this deck. The +2 ability that lets you discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many, that's doing a couple things for you. It's letting you cycle through your deck faster, but also, do you remember, there are ways to get stuff back out of your graveyard, so those cards that you're tossing aren't lost to you either. The -2 effect of sacrificing an artifact and then returning one of those artifact cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, again, can be super relevant. And if you happen to someday -10 this thing, that is just awesome for this deck. I mean, it's perfect for any artifact deck, really. But yeah, that won't happen often. Granted, in a multiplayer game, people will probably stop you from doing that for the most part. But if you can pull it off, especially late in the game, when you're down to 1 or 2 other opponents, it can be a win condition kind of just on its own. So that's actually pretty awesome. Open the Vaults. This is cool. It's a little bit symmetrical, sure, because you return all artifacts and enchantment cards from all graveyards to their owner's control, which means other players may get some benefit. However, I mean, look at this deck. You should hopefully get the biggest benefit. Now, granted, you could be sitting at a table with someone else playing an artifact deck, and you may have to consider this card a little more before you play it. But for the most part, you should find a lot of value here. Phyrexian Rebirth. This is a panic button, destroy all creature spell. It does give you an XX horror token, which is also an artifact. Again, that's nice, based on how many creatures were destroyed that way. So it's good. I do think, again, in a multiplayer game, if you wipe the board and you give yourself one huge creature, somebody's probably going to destroy it most of the time, but it is still a nice panic button if things aren't going your way. Beacon of Unrest. Now, this totally makes sense in this deck. This is a card that was part of a cycle back in the day, but this time around you get to put a target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and then shuffle it in your library, which is pretty awesome because then you could potentially draw it again. But just the fact that this deck would love to recur artifacts or creatures at times from the graveyard, but what's nice is it doesn't even have to be your graveyard. If somebody happens to have something better out there, you can just go ahead and take that. Trash for Treasure. Here's another way just to juggle artifacts, and as you can start to see now, this deck is really in the business to do this. You can go ahead and sacrifice one of your artifacts, bring back something else that's important to you at that given time, and then maybe later on you can go back and get that other thing again. So again, it's sacrificing artifacts to get artifacts back. You don't have a whole lot of like tokens and stuff to play with. You do have a few, but for the most part, you're going to have to make some decisions about when's the right time to sacrifice one particular card for another one. And I think this will come up quite a bit when you play this deck. Whip Flare does not hurt artifact creatures, so that's important to note. It does 2 damage to everything else, though, so that's going to be good for you in most cases. Again, you know what? Even if there's not a lot of targets for this, even if this takes out 1 creature, the fact that it only costs 2, there's just a lot of value to be had here for sure. Read the Runes. Here's another card that kind of plays into the theme a little bit. You can go ahead and draw a bunch of cards. Now, for each card drawn that way, you either have to discard a card or you have to sacrifice a permanent. So again, you might have some permanents you can sacrifice to this, or maybe just draw some extra land cards later in the game and you just need some more heat. That's really where this will probably shine. This is actually a pretty decent card for sure when it comes to card draw, especially considering it's an instant. All right, Trial and Error. I mean, nothing special about this card in this deck. I think they were just looking for something unique to print that's an answer to some problems. I mean, this deals with a combat trick issue. It deals with a multicolor spell that you might not want to resolve. So it's cheap, it's economical, it's just kind of a fun, nice inclusion for sure. Dispeller's Capsule. Great card for this deck. First off, pretty economical if you need to get rid of another artifact or enchantment, so it's there if you have to do that. But also, it's cheap, you throw it on the battlefield, and it's an artifact that sits on the battlefield for you. That will do two things. It adds to your artifact count. It also makes people think twice about playing maybe an artifact or enchantment that they feel that you may want to destroy. Same thing with Executioner's Capsule. Very economical here, only costs 1, sits on the battlefield, makes people think twice before playing their really big creature, as long, of course, as it's not a black creature, which this can't touch. But again, even if it just sits on your battlefield, it goes towards your artifact count, and that does mean something. Thopter Foundry. Okay, here's another way to get some tokens. However, you do have to sacrifice a non-token artifact to get one. This is also a nice little life gain source, too. Having said that, you're probably familiar with this card from the Sword of the Meek Thopter Foundry combo. You see that in Modern quite a bit now, right? So this card, yes, can do that, but also on its own, sometimes you can get some incremental value here, especially if someone's going to destroy one of your artifacts, then at least you have a sack outlet to get some value out of it. Blinkmoth Urn. This is actually really good if you want to just ramp up the amount of mana you're getting. Now, if you're not playing against another artifact deck at the table, you're going to garner, obviously, the most advantage out of this. However, I have seen sometimes people play this and have a way to tap it so that your opponents don't get the ability, which is interesting, but maybe going a little too deep, more deep than maybe you need to go in a lot of cases. On its own, though, this is a great way to just get extra mana. Bone Horde, another Germ token card, which are always awesome. This one can be quite good in a multiplayer game. I mean, +X based on the number of creatures in all graveyards. That's actually kind of awesome. Only costs 2 to equip too. 4 to cast, but that's fine with me because I'm getting the 0/0 Germ token, so it's coming in as a creature, and then if I want to move it to something more relevant, it only costs 2 to do so. This thing's a beater, especially if you have a card with evasion, like one of these big flyers that can get across. Commander Spear. Of course, we've seen this in every deck so far. Nice mana fixing. You can cycle it later in the game. Cranial Plating. This actually is like a win condition in this deck. Incredibly powerful piece of equipment. The double black, meaning you can basically switch it at instant speed. The one creature that your opponent can't block is going to end up with the Cranial Plating, right? So it really puts opponents sometimes in a no-win situation in combat because whatever creature gets by, even if it's a 1/1, is about to become really, really big. Everflowing Chalice, another great way to ramp your mana. Also, it's 0 casting cost, so you can fetch it up with Trinket Mage. I think that's worth noting for sure. But you see this card a lot in cubes and stuff. It's very, very powerful in this type of deck. Felwar Stone, again, a little bit of variance here, but you're playing Commander. You should be able to find the colors you need. Ichor Wellspring, and here's the first of a couple of cards that are going to give you an advantage when they enter the battlefield and give you an advantage when they leave the battlefield. Again, totally makes sense for what this deck's trying to do. This is your sacrifice fodder, but in the meantime, it also counts as an artifact on the battlefield for you, which again, we've seen is relevant. So this time around, you pay 2, and when this enters the battlefield or goes into your graveyard, you get to draw a card. So it cycles itself when it comes in. When it comes out, you start getting card advantage. Pretty awesome. Loxodon Warhammer, another great piece of classic equipment. Costs 3 and then 3 to equip, but you're getting +3/+0, Trample, and Lifelink. Trample could be very, very relevant with some of these big creatures that you'll have or creatures that are being buffed, and then you can just get in for some serious damage and also gain life. Great piece of equipment. Microsynth Wellspring, very similar to the card we just saw a moment ago. When it comes into play, you get to search for basic land, reveal, put it into your hand. When it goes away to your graveyard, you get to do it again. So another really strong piece of sacrifice fodder that also can sit on your battlefield and be an artifact. Navinral's Disc. This one's interesting in this deck because, yes, it's another card that kind of sits there and makes opponents think twice about what they want to play. It allows people to kind of slow down the game a little bit. No one will want to overcommit when this card's out there. At the same time, if you pop it, it's really going to decimate your board state, so you do have to think about when is the right time to pop it. I mean, it's still a good panic button. It's also an artifact, which is going to count towards artifact cost as it sits on your battlefield. I find that very interesting. Also take into account it can't deal with planeswalkers, so that could be a disadvantage. So this is an interesting inclusion. I think it's just fine. It's a good way to even the playing field if you do get behind for some reason. And keep in mind too, there are ways to get some of your cards back out of the graveyard, so this might be less devastating for you than other players at certain times. So keep that into account. Just a real interesting inclusion. I think most of the time you're just going to put it on the battlefield and let it sit there and let people think twice about playing their stuff while it sits around and is another artifact for you for buffing your other stuff. Skull Clamp, maybe not as good in this deck as it could be in some other decks, considering you don't have a lot of token action going on here, but there's still always a value that can be found from a Skull Clamp. This is a very powerful card. Again, you can pick this up with Trinket Mage too. Soul Ring, another card you can get with Trinket Mage, one of the most powerful cards ever printed. Great mana ramp. Of course, like I said, this has been included in all these Commander decks pretty much every year, I think, now. And this is phenomenal. Even though, yes, you may be a tad sick of seeing it at this point, I think it's good that they do this and put these in every one of these products, because if they didn't, this card would just start to go up in value real quick, I think. Switchfoot Boots, fine piece of equipment. I mean, nothing to write home about here, but it does give something hexproof and haste. So if you want to protect your creature from spot removal or something like that, or just attack in faster, it's there for you. Trading Post. This is another card that's going to help you kind of with the juggling of cards back and forth from the graveyard to the battlefield. This enables you to start picking up stuff out of your graveyard without having to lose artifacts, which is kind of nice. It's just a little slow. Like, it costs 4 to play, and then if you pay 1 and tap it and pay a life, you can create a 0/1 white goat creature token, and then when you untap it, you can pay 1 and tap to sacrifice a creature to return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So that's probably the most benefit you'll get out of this, considering its speed. Now, if you have all the time in the world, yes, if you look through all 4 of these abilities, it does kind of create an endless loop. It just takes a really long time to do it. So it kind of is what it is. It's a really cool, versatile card, though, and I'm glad it's included. I think it's actually pretty good in this deck. Okay, let's move on to some of the non-basic lands. Most of these will be for color fixing. The first one is one of the tricolor lands, Arcane Sanctum, and you're actually going to see a lot of tricolor lands in this particular deck. Azorius Chancery, it's a bounce land, and you're also going to see a lot of bounce lands in this mana base. Boros Garrison, another bounce land. Buried Rune. Now, this one isn't really here for mana fixing as much as it's simply here to return a target artifact from your graveyard to your hand again. So that's kind of a nice extra utility if you need to do that. Command Tower for your mana fixing. Crumbling Necropolis, another tricolor land. Darksteel Citadel. Okay, not only is this a land that taps for mana, but also it's indestructible and it's an artifact. You'll find tons of value here. Dimir Aqueduct, another bounce land. Evolving Wilds for fixing. Exotic Orchard, a little bit of variance again, but shouldn't be an issue most of the time. Mystic Monastery, another tricolor land. Nomad Outpost, yet another tricolor land. Rakdos Canarium, another bounce land. Rupture Spire for fixing. Seat of Synod. This one's interesting to me. This is an artifact land. It taps for blue. Doesn't come into play tapped or anything like that. There's actually a whole cycle of these. They're very powerful. They play really well with these artifact style decks. But this is the only one they gave you. I mean, they could have given you 3 others and they chose not to. So I don't know. If you're looking for a really easy, quick upgrade to this deck, that would be one of them. Instead, they just gave you the basic lands. So not really sure why that is. Feels like this would have been a good opportunity to bring at least 4 of these 5 back out, but okay, there's that one anyway. Temple of the False God, great to continue to ramp your mana, especially in a deck like this. It's giving you colorless mana, but can really speed things along. Terramorphic Expanse for fixing again. And finally, Transguild Promenade. And of course, this is another card that's going to help you fix your colors. Now we have our basic lands. Let's look at those quickly. And I mentioned this in all the other videos, but one last time, shout out to Mark Poole, Rebecca Guay, and Kev Walker for the art on these basic lands. They are incredible. So you're going to get 5 plains. You're going to get 5 islands. You'll get 4 swamps. And finally, 4 mountains. And that is the deck list. So my evaluation in general of this deck, it actually feels like a lot of fun. I like the fact that they made an artifact deck, but it's not just kind of a straightforward artifact deck. They kind of added the graveyard theme to it, and I actually find that pretty fun and engaging. So this is another deck that I'd be very interested in playing and trying out. It seems like it could be really cool. I like artifact decks in general. Like a lot of times when I draft in cubes, especially like vintage style cubes or power cubes, I do like to go the artifact route when I can. So this deck kind of speaks to me in that regard. Some of the cards that are in this are actually very prominent cube cards, which is kind of cool. But at the same time, this isn't just kind of like, hey, I threw a bunch of artifacts together and they have synergy because they're artifacts. There's definitely another theme going on here that maybe adds to the power level of this deck. And I'm looking forward to trying out and just to see kind of how smooth it is and that type of thing. Now that we've seen all 5 decks, my overall impression, this is an incredible product. If I had to pick a favorite, I'd probably say yesterday's deck, the Entropic Uprising, which is kind of the chaos deck. And the reason I probably would pick that one is because I really like the Wheel of Fortune effects, even though it doesn't have Wheel of Fortune in it, which is kind of funny, but it's got a lot of cards that do the same thing as Wheel of Fortune. So I don't know, I just really like that. Just the controlled chaos of that deck just seems really interesting to me. Maybe that's followed up by the Stalwart Unity deck would be maybe my second favorite, again just because it's so unique. And yes, it is an archetype that exists. It's not like they made something new completely. That'd probably be impossible. But for Wizards to actually take that style of deck and put it in a reconstructed deck, I thought was very bold and unique, and I think that's actually pretty cool. Like these group hug decks that are trying to be everybody's friend, but at the same time are just giving them the tools to destroy each other. It just feels very sinister, especially for a deck that has no black in it, and I just think that's really cool. As for the other 3, this one and the first 2 we looked at, I think they're awesome decks too. Like I would not mind playing with any of the 5. And ultimately, I always get the question, like, which one of these should I buy if I'm only going to buy one? Quite honestly, to me, the answer is buy the deck that looks the most fun to you. I mean, Commander's about having fun. It's not always about being spiky and trying to have the strongest deck. And quite honestly, these are all good decks. You could pick any one of these 5. Do really well with it, I think, out of the box. And if this is something that you're really into, like for example, you love artifacts, or maybe you love +1/+1 counters and you pick Breed Lethality or something like that, pick the deck you love, and then if you want to make it more powerful, you can always switch out cards later and just try different things and play off some of the other themes as well, because there's some little sub themes in some of these that they didn't truly flush out, which you could flush out and make bigger if that's what you want to do. So pick the one that looks fun and just have a good time with it. Ultimately, that's what this type of format is about and should be about. So hey, having said that, I hope these videos helped. I hope they give you a good idea now if you only are going to buy 1 or 2 of these decks, which 1 or 2 that you want. Or, you know, some folks will end up buying all 5. I mean, I'll buy all 5 because I'll probably open them on the channel, of course. But if I wasn't buying all 5 to open on the channel, I still think I kind of would want all 5 because this is actually an awesome product. I will kind of close with this. We know now, WotC, you can make awesome pre-constructed decks. So I expect more from some of your other products, like the dual decks, for example. If you can make decks this cool, like I expect more stuff from your dual decks going forward. So, but yeah, this is an awesome product. I think they knocked it out of the park with this one. So, hey, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.